Cleopatra was a woman of great cunning, charm, and beauty who built an empire and made it the greatest empire in history. She was the youngest woman to rule Egypt. Her empire enjoyed wealth, riches, and luxury during her reign, giving her an enviable power never seen before. Legend has it that in just 10 years, Alexander the Great built a vast empire that included ancient Egypt, making him highly regarded and respected. However, after his tragic death, the empire fell into a state of war, with several commanders and generals vying for control of vast territories. In the end, no agreement was reached during the war. The great empire was thus divided, and the Egyptian empire was first commanded by the Macedonian general Ptolemy, and the Ptolemaic dynasty was established. As the years passed, the empire grew and established itself as one of the wealthiest empires. Then Ptolemy, the 12th king, took over the pharaonic power, and his wife Cleopatra ruled with his 6th king in the city of Alexandria. Ptolemy XII entered into a grand alliance with his chief adversary. Although he remained in power, he proved to be a man guided by peace rather than war. Over the years, the love between the pharaoh and Cleopatra VI deepened. 5 children were born: Ptolemy XIII, Ptolemy XIV, Arsinoe IV, Berenice IV, and Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra showed great interest in education during her childhood. Therefore, she received a very privileged academic education. She was too interested in education. No one in the Ptolemaic dynasty had to learn as much as this wise woman, but her teachers were astonished. She was impressed by Cleopatra's intelligence in learning letters, art, war, history, geometry, mathematics, and languages, and she mastered her 8 languages, including Egyptian, making her the first in her family to do so. I became someone I could talk to. This language. From her early years without an interpreter, she was passionate about oratory and philosophy. Thanks to it, she was able to express herself with her great posture, grace with appropriate gestures, and very sweet voice, showing her great intelligence and education. Cleopatra enjoyed visiting the great library of Alexandria. The beautiful maiden took advantage of every moment to prepare and learn any art, since she felt complete in this place, where numerous books useful for her education and culture were kept. When Cleopatra grew up, she was described as a woman of extraordinary beauty. Never before had Cleopatra enjoyed all the privileges of Alexandria as the daughter of a ruler. She was surrounded by servants and guards, and her days were surrounded by abundance. Cleopatra lived in a huge palace with beautiful gardens. Where she went out to meditate and read, this great palace became the most luxurious palace in the whole Mediterranean, and the more the Ptolemaic dynasty grew, the more the kingdom expanded. Years later, a great misfortune came to the family of Ptolemy, and the empire's great disturbances disturbed the people, as they were dissatisfied by the annexation of Cyprus by Rome. The pharaoh had greatly rejected his wife for the decisions he had taken with the Roman people, so Cleopatra VI, along with his eldest daughter, expelled the pharaoh of Egypt, stripping him of his title for several years. The wife of Ptolemy XII ruled Alexandria with the help of her daughter, Berenice Cleopatra. For her part, she closely observed the role now developed by her mother and sister, and from that moment on, the throne captivated her with a great sense of power, and satisfaction touched her soul. When she thought that someday she would be the queen of Alexandria, time passed and a terrible illness made the flamboyant queen decay, and soon after she died. Cleopatra VI had passed away, and all the people, accompanied in grief for their queen, who had departed to the beyond, her children, wept bitterly about the loss of their mother. This was a severe blow to the Alexandrian Empire, which was maintained despite some internal problems, as is the case with family successors. Immediately after her death, according to tradition, her eldest daughter was to hold the title of queen, and initially, King Berenice IV of Egypt assumed her power. Berenice played a very important role, and everything went well. However, her reign as ruler was short-lived, as it was her father who ended her monarchy. His father-daughter quarrels became a major controversy during his reign. Several revolts caused great damage in Egypt, and the threat to the Berenice monarchy continued. However, she did not give up the throne. Cleopatra, with her thirst for power and her desire to become queen, goes to Rome, where her father was exiled, and plots her return, ending Berenice's reign there. She found the help she was looking for. She offered him a large fortune if he would regain his position in Egypt, so a large army accompanied Ptolemy XII, better known as Alice, to Egypt. Then some things happened. This granted him access to the palace and restored his throne. Once he achieved his goal, the elite ordered the murder of his daughter Berenice, ending his reign in a very subtle way. The current Pharaoh of Egypt also regained his power after negotiating with the Roman army and making a deal, ordering the murder of all of Egypt's wealthy families to pay off their debts. Her daughter, Cleopatra, was proud. To take over, she secretly supported her father's every decision and closely watched his role as her pharaoh. She learned a lot about how to rule using her cunning and intelligence. At the age of 66, Elite suffered a breakdown in his health, and each day it worsened as he recovered from his serious illness. His most loyal and trusted advisors managed the kingdom. However, Elites never recovered but rather departed to the underworld, but before he died, the pharaoh gathered his sons and advisors and said, "The day of my death has come, and from now on my sons Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIII shall rule Alexandria despite the great pain caused by the death of her father." Cleopatra was too happy to have reached the throne. At last, the power was in her hands. However, the idea of marrying her brother was unpleasant to her, for at that time Cleopatra was 18 years old and her brother Ptolemy was only 13, but they had to comply with the laws of Egypt, and marriage between siblings was obligatory in royal cases. The empire was dressed in mourning and thus dismissed our leads, who despite his hard work as pharaoh left the empire, with several failures, but with this cunning made a great alliance with the Romans, so that their children should rule under the tutelage of these. At that time, Rome was being led by Julius Caesar, a very prestigious and important military and political figure in the empire, and with whom elites maintained great alliances. Cleopatra was too ingenious. Her government strategies at the beginning of her reign were amazing. However, Ptolemy XIII began to have airs of grandeur, and gradually wished to displace Cleopatra from the throne, thus wishing to rule alone all of Egypt. His interest in taking the throne alone was not only his idea, for behind him were his loyal advisors, who wished to exile Cleopatra, so they influenced Ptolemy to finish off the queen and remove her from power forever. Cleopatra, noticing her brother Ptolemy's unusual behavior, sensed his evil intentions and decided to take advantage of them. Due to the sympathy of the people and the resulting alliances with some enemy empires, Cleopatra approached several enemy leaders, especially the Romans, with the aim of gaining allies. Because Rome had a large kingdom at the time and was a great ally. When civil war broke out in Egypt, the monarch developed great friendships with several enemy chieftains and governors, especially the cunning Queen of Egypt, and formed a grand alliance with Pompey, a very important military commander in Rome. He was also the military commander of the kingdom. On the other hand, when Cleopatra was told that she would betray Egypt, she viewed the actions taken by her queen very badly. Pharaoh's advisors, Aquila, Pothinus, and Theodotus of Chaos, had him at their disposal. Because, due to his young age, they were the ones who practically ruled the kingdom. And they told Cleopatra to be removed from the throne. One day, when Cleopatra returned from her travels, Ptolemy declared his wife a traitor, drove her out in a riot, and tried to eliminate the queen, but Cleopatra's cunning was astounding. However, his wife managed to escape. Egypt was unharmed. Cleopatra sought asylum in Syria, which he had considered an ally for some time. There, she managed to gather several military personnel and complete a large army, which was soon to be used to rebuild her empire. However, troubles did not stop in Alexandria, where upheavals and small-scale battles destroyed parts of the empire, and Ptolemy's government was extremely dangerous to the pharaohs at the time, who were also under Cleopatra's influence. On the advice of his teachers, he set out in search of his sister with a large army to prevent her return to Egypt. Unfortunately, Ptolemy was out of luck. On his way, he received a strange message that Pompey, a Roman military officer and consul, had fled a rebellion after his defeat in Greece. Years before Pompey and Julius Caesar became close friends, he was on his way to Alexandria, where he was persecuted and murdered by Julius Caesar. However, several power struggles led to a rivalry between the two, forcing Pompey to seek new allies. After being defeated in order to protect himself from the wrath of the Roman army, Pompey came to the aid of the kingdom of Alexandria. He saw this as a sign of an alliance, with the empire being led by Alice's son, as he had helped the elites regain the status of pharaoh in the past and was also a good friend of the elites. Ptolemy would help him evacuate, and the pharaoh's advisors knew that by aiding and hiding Pompey, they would be ordering Roman warriors to war. So they bet on a better plan that would make them allies with Caesar's army. When the Roman consul was about to arrive, civil strife arose in Egypt, which increased the concern of the pharaoh and his allies. The arrival of Pompey put the kingdom of Ptolemy in disquiet, for his advisors believed that if they kept the Roman council alive, he would help return Cleopatra to Egypt. Theodotus of Chios, who had to make the best decision for Alexandria regarding Pompey, met behind closed doors, and the three remained undecided and disoriented because they could not find a solution. Then, after a long silence, Theodotus, with a smiling face, said, "The dead do not bite." He nodded his head, touched the shoulder of his companions, and said, "At last, we have the solution. We will ally ourselves with Julius Caesar, for his army is very powerful and will benefit us more than an old consul. As far as Pompey is concerned, as soon as he touches Egyptian territory, we will get rid of him." Aquila's and partners supported the idea of Theodotus, and thus made known to the pharaohs such a treacherous solution. Ptolemy and his allies were happy with what was decided and were waiting for the arrival of the Romans. When they knew that he was about to arrive on Egyptian soil, a large retinue went out to receive him. However, Pompey believed that this contingent would be welcomed as soon as they set foot on Egyptian soil. He was violently attacked by several soldiers and cried out for help. He finally died, sensing Alexandria's great betrayal. The Egyptians cut off his head. A few days passed, and Julius Caesar and his army reached Ptolemy's empire. When he entered the palace, he was received with a grand banquet and the best treatment compared to other visitors. One of the royal advisors carried a shining silver tray, and as soon as the Roman troops came in, he handed it to him with a bow as a sign of hospitality and alliance. Julius Caesar took it, picked up his cloak, covered it, and was surprised to see the eerie find watching his crew. The sacrifice the Egyptians gave him was the slaughtered head of Pompey. When the Romans saw the consul's violent death, they were so upset that they stabbed him in the hand. He lamented the great loss of the Roman Empire. Despite the difference in power between the two, Julius Caesar liked Pompey as a member of his family and tearfully regretted not being able to say goodbye to him under dire circumstances that led to his own death. He glared at the advisor who presented Pompey's head and ordered him to be executed for the murder of a Roman consul. The advisors could not imagine what Julius Caesar would have ordered. If he had given the order openly, the Egyptians could have waged war and destroyed this small garrison before the Roman dictator could execute him. He settled in the royal palace and offered to meet the kings of Alexandria, so Ptolemy returned and went in search of Cleopatra. At Julius Caesar's call, he left a small army at vigil in case his sister Cleopatra showed up. Meanwhile, Cleopatra was thinking of returning to Alexandria when her brilliant idea came to her mind. She was in danger, and she was not allowed to appear before the Alexandrian guards, who had strict orders not to allow her inside. They can even die at their own hands. If she dared to return, it would be to carry out her secret plan. She sought out Apollodorus, her faithful friend and servant, and asked for his help, and he immediately agreed because Apollodorus adored Cleopatra and helped her in everything. She decided even the Sicilians would form a large network of informants throughout Egypt. Cleopatra told him, "Help me to return to Alexandria. I know that Julius Caesar is in the palace, and I wish to ally myself with him for my return." She said to her, "Count on me, dear Cleopatra. Tell me what I must do. You will get the finest carpet you can find, and we will send it as a gift to Caesar, an exotic and unsurpassed gift for when he unrolls it. I will be the greatest surprise," said Cleopatra. The Egyptians gathered a troop of her men to make the delicate delivery at the hands of the Romans. Apollodorus found a beautiful carpet, and immediately Cleopatra ordered them to leave in a small boat bound for Alexandria. They were within a few hours of arriving in Egypt. Apollodorus' son will define the carpet, and immediately Cleopatra laid down on it and gave them the order to wrap it up and tie it carefully. His plan was far-fetched. However, Cleopatra's intelligence was impressive. She had faith that her strategy would work. The monarch would be wrapped in the carpet, and thus no one would suspect, nor see her enter Alexandria. So when they arrived, they passed all the filters until they reached the royal palace, where Julius Caesar was, because he had taken command of the empire and was putting in order several issues that unbalanced Egypt, with the excuse that they were carrying a gift from an ally of the Romans. They managed to pass, and so they left the carpet in Caesar's room. "We have come to leave you a gift, sir. Cleopatra sent it to you," said the men. Caesar said in surprise, "Leave it, I will open it later," but Apollodorus approached him and said, "Cleopatra asked us to open the carpet here in front of her, and it is very important to comply with her orders." The Romans did not hesitate and said they could do it. He stood watching while they unrolled the luxurious carpet, and when they were about to unroll the last layer, he was confused. A few moans caught Caesar's attention. He drew nearer and saw the excellent Cleopatra lying on the carpet. He went all over her body with his eyes, for the Egyptian was lovely. Caesar was truly shocked, for he knew that she may not reach Alexandria. They were cleared out alone. In July, Caesar gave Cleopatra his hand to stand up and said to her that it could be a joy to meet the one they say to be a goddess, and Cleopatra answered, "I am the girl of Isis. I am a goddess and ruler of Egypt." Julius Caesar grinned and told her that, at that minute, she was not welcome. Be that as it may, Cleopatra's sweet words and her erotic motions made Julius Caesar yield at her feet. Cleopatra, seeing that the Roman was insane about her, took advantage and told him to assist her to recapture the position of authority and claimed that she was much better and more intelligent than her brother. Cleopatra thought that in the event that Julius Caesar sided with her, getting freed of her brother would be much less demanding, and other than that, she would be secure in Alexandria. While that was going on, the Romans surrendered to the charms of the foremost excellent lady in Egypt and gave in to her, and so they had an undertaking. Julius Caesar took the kill of Pompey as a culmination pardon, to question the devotion of Ptolemy, and in this way declared his bolster for Cleopatra to recapture his office. This lethal news rankled Ptolemy, and he chose to announce war on the Romans since, being an Egyptian territory, the Romans' drawbacks were outstanding, which guaranteed Ptolemy that he would win. Cleopatra recaptured her position, took once more the part of ruler of Alexandria, and started to run the show, concurring to her interface with Caesar. As her fundamental partner, Ptolemy sent equipped troops to go up against the Roman ships. Julius Caesar had as of now asked for fortifications, and when these arrived, a great fight opened within the waters of the Nile River. Caesar's cleverness gave him an advantage over the Egyptians, and his techniques devastated entire ships and caused them to be destroyed within the conclusion. Ptolemy's armed force misplaced his men in a grotesque way, since the fortifications of the Roman common had indeed arrived and the Pharaoh himself chose to battle. In any case, luckiness was not in his favor, since his transport was assaulted with more fury until it was wrecked within the waters of the Nile. The fight calmed down, and after the ruler of Egypt kicked the bucket suffocating in its waters, Caesar appeared his quality and took this truth as an awesome triumph and celebrated it on high. The Romans and Cleopatra were chosen to create a trip down the Nile, where they lived and cherished it enthusiastically. Although, at first, Cleopatra started this love affair as a strategy to regain power, on her return, Cleopatra took power as never before and established several reforms that made Egypt rise, because they were going through an extremely delicate moment where they were about to fall as an empire. However, Cleopatra's vivacity made her empire the most recognized. At that time, a few months later, Cleopatra gave birth to a beautiful child, whom she named Ptolemy Caesar and was better known as Caesarion. A product of her affair was Caesar. Everyone in the kingdom knew that Cleopatra was having an affair with the Romans, although she was married to his brother Ptolemy XIV. The monarch continued with her beloved Julius Caesar. A couple of years passed, and the Romans decided to return to Rome, as it was known that in the empire, he would receive great awards, recognition, and praise for being a great conqueror and warrior. Thus Cleopatra and Caesarion bid farewell to the Roman, awaiting his speedy return. When Caesar arrived in Rome, great celebrations were held, and he was named dictator for the life of the nation. Thus, the Romans had become men of much power and prestige. However, Alexandria under Cleopatra's rule was much more prosperous. Up to that time, several years passed, and Alexandria grew steadily and positioned itself as one of the most important and prosperous empires, thanks to Cleopatra's great government strategies. One day, Caesarion and his mother organized an expedition to travel to Rome to share political strategies and alliances, which were very important for the empires, but also to introduce his son, who would be the successor of his father. When he died and thus ruled Rome, when Cleopatra arrived, she was not very welcomed by the people. Because Julius Caesar was married, the arrival of the Egyptian and her relationship with the monarch of Rome were frowned upon. Cleopatra, regardless of the rumors, settled in the royal house with her son and thus spent several months in Rome. Julius Caesar led several conquests, and at that time his power was exorbitant to such an extent that the Roman elite and the highest Roman officials were losing power. Seeing Caesar's actions with Cleopatra, several Roman senators started a small political revolt to end Caesar's reign, and so they summoned the monarch to a secret meeting, and while there, they assassinated him. The terrible news came the next morning. Julius Caesar had died at the hands of false leaders who sought power over him, and so the throne was ready for a new ruler. Mark Antony, Julius Caesar's right-hand man, took the reins of the kingdom for a few days while the funeral rites took place, and thus also began a quest to avenge the death of Rome's dictator. On the other hand, Cleopatra saw her son's chance at last, and after the funeral, the administrator of the kingdom read the Roman will in the main square, to be heard by all the people. When the will was read, Caesar Ion was nowhere to be found as he was considered an illegitimate son, so Julius Caesar had to ignore it. Cleopatra was furious, as she had left absolutely nothing to her son and had not even considered him a ruler, as he had left the position to his nephew Octavian. At this point, Cleopatra's day was no longer safe, for at any moment, they could attack her. Now, without Julius Caesar, she was in hostile lands. So she gathered her contingent and returned to Alexandria to continue her great government, and on the way, Cleopatra thought of a way to rule entirely alone, and so she ordered her to kill her brother Ptolemy XIV to stay on the throne forever. The arrangement was given, and so her corolla passed on at the hands of his sister alone, in the position of royalty. Cleopatra started to run the show amazingly. Alexandria did not halt developing, and the plenitude was lucky for other kingdoms in Rome. Stamp Antony needed to meet with Cleopatra, so he sent an emissary to Alexandria with a letter to the Egyptian ruler, and when the news came, the ruler did not delay going to that assembly. The Roman Mark Antony had cited in bone structure, so the ruler quickly arranged an expansive dispatch for his trip. Check Antony was as of now in bone structure, holding up for the wonderful Cleopatra, until one evening the dispatch of the ruler touched them arrive. An excellent transport with purple sails carried the ruler, her paddles were silver and gold. Cleopatra appeared to have status control and riches, and the dispatch that Egypt had was so amazing that Check Antony himself was staggered to see such a gigantic vessel. All the individuals deserted their obligations to provide a triumphal entrance to the one who claimed to be a goddess, since her title was well known in a few regions. On the other hand, Check Antony, since he met Cleopatra, was profoundly in awe with her excellence charm. An insight that captivated the Romans, be that as it may, he might not uncover himself sometime recently in his domain. The gathering and celebration were radiant since they accepted that the Egyptian ruler merited the finest of her individuals. Stamp Antony received her with respect, so they settled within the regal royal residence, where both held awesome gatherings for the political, great of the realms, but Check Antony was trying to find something more. He lauded the ruler and, with sweet words, looked for the cherish of the Egyptians to Roman surprise. Cleopatra was charmed with him, and so he continuously responded. Both went through a few months in the bone structure, and after that, in Alexandria, where they fulfilled their cherish, their sentiment was official in Egypt. In spite of the fact that Mark Antony was hitched in Rome, he proceeded with his sentiment. Since he was profoundly in cherish with the ruler, a few months passed, and within the illustrious royal residence, it was reported that Cleopatra had given birth to twin children. The siblings of Check Antony were born, and as they were born, the Romans named the children as his beneficiaries and successors. In this way, the partners named them Helios, which implies the sun, and Selene, which suggests the moon. Before long after the birth of their revered children, Stamp Antony had to return to Rome for political matters. However, he did not need to take off his adored Cleopatra, since he felt that without her, he may not proceed. When he arrived in Rome, Octavian got on him and designated them a few regal duties concerning their regions. His spouse Fulvia got on him with delight since it had been a long time since she had seen him. But Check Antony was far off, and as much as he needed to take off his spouse, he could not do it. The Roman was continuously on the post for Cleopatra. He might not disregard her charms, but indeed, he may not forsake his position and remain in Rome, satisfying his regal obligations. In the long run, an uncommon malady struck Phobia, no matter how much she was treated. She could not recoup, and before long, she kicked the bucket. It was a really troublesome time for Marcus. Be that as it may, it was the idealized opportunity for him and his adored Cleopatra to be together once more, and this time unreservedly, and presently he would not be branded as an adulterer. Stamp Antony's plans to return to Alexandria with the ruler were baffled by Octavian. Since he was completely against the Adore undertaking, they had to maintain a strategic distance from such a union. He proposed to Check that he wed Octavian, his sister, as Chamber of Rome. Mark Antony had to present a good image and obey the king's orders, so a wedding took place, they got married, and a few years later, 3 children were born. Octavian had some internal conflicts. Started. Lepidus and Mark Antony claimed power over several territories, creating an obvious rivalry between the Romans. However, Lepidus got tired of fighting and eventually withdrew from politics, leading to a major struggle between Mark Antony and Octavian for power. In the end, they both shared power in Rome, so Antony having conquered the eastern provinces, Octavian conquered the west. However, their conflict was not over yet when Mark Antony met Cleopatra in the city of Antioch and, despite being married, ran into the arms of her true love. After breaking up with Octavian, the two were deeply in love, and their love was successful after their reunion. Cleopatra took Mark Antony to Alexandria, and being there made their union official. Both ruled with intelligence, and Cleopatra's strategies made Egypt prosper rapidly, and the people were happy because the beautiful Egyptian queen had managed to consolidate a powerful empire and was very feared by many for several years. They lived together in Alexandria with great celebrations, riches, and abundance. Cleopatra became the woman with more power among all the empires and was highly respected. Several conflicts in Syria made Octavian turn to Egypt because his army was sheltered in that territory, so they had to flee after the revolts. The Roman sovereign was extremely angry and wanted to end the romance between Cleopatra and his former ally Mark Antony because he had abandoned his sister in Rome for a foreigner and also because he feared losing part of the Roman Empire. That was under the command of Mark Antony. Thus, Octavian began a civil war against the supporters of the consul Antony. As a result, a great battle took place in the waters of Greece. Cleopatra trusted the army that consolidated her beloved, so she decided to accompany him in battle. The confrontation was disastrous, and the great army of Octavian had finished with much of the contingent of Antony. So Cleopatra decided to return to Alexandria, as the defeat was marked. Once she entered the palace, Cleopatra announced to her allies and subjects of false victory that she would seek more political ties with other regions, but soon the news of the absolute defeat reached Egypt. So Cleopatra hid until she found a strategy to grow her empire. Mark Antony and his loved ones suffered the crisis that plagued the empire, despite any support from her husband. Cleopatra was not the same. After a terrible defeat, her role as a ruler was extraordinary, and the struggle to grow her empire was tireless, but it was not enough. Octavian had conquered Egypt, and the rule of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Hanging in the balance was Octavia's desire to end Cleopatra's power. Octavian sent a terrible message to the ruler, saying that he would forgive him if he murdered his lover. The sovereign did not respond to the terrible proposal of the Romans and decided to flee with his army because they were very close to Alexandria. When Cleopatra sought a safe refuge, false news arrived in the years of Marcus. Antony was told that the forces of Octavian had attacked and killed the ruler of Egypt when, hearing the news, he called the name of his beloved and, in tears, unsheathed his sword and dropped it on his breast. For when his beloved Cleopatra was dead, he had nothing left to live for. Fortunately, Antonio's hard blow didn't kill her, but it did seriously injure her, causing her to lose too much blood and requiring several doctors to attend. A speedy messenger ran across town to find Mark Antony, who knew his whereabouts. His beloved and wanted to deny the news of his death, and when he found the Roman, he was already very bleeding and weak, but he was still conscious. Then he told him, "Sarah Queen is alive, she managed to escape." The breath of life ran through the body of Mark Antony, who notes that his beloved is alive and does not want to die. He asks to be taken into the arms of Cleopatra so that they can finally be together when they meet Cleopatra and run into her arms. He was too weak, and the pain was unrelenting, but he was content because he knew his beloved was by his side. Mark Antony breathed his last in Cleopatra's arms and begged his beloved to surrender to Octavian. To save her life, she died, ending the story with her longing for her beloved Mark Antony. Cleopatra's despair was uncontrollable because a few days later she received word that Octavian had killed her beloved son Caesarion. The Egyptian's pain was too great, causing him several serious health problems. Cleopatra fell into a fatal depression because she had lost her beloved Antony, her son, and she did not know what would become of him. Empire, although he had several doctors at his service, did not want to be treated because he wanted to die, believing he had nothing to fight for, but Octavian did not want Cleopatra to die. So he forced him to seek medical attention until he recovered completely, which he did not. He threatened to murder her children, so Cleopatra was left with no other choice. Octavian later cornered Cleopatra in Alexandria, marking the end of her reign as the most powerful woman in Egypt. Octavian locked him up as a hostage and kept him under constant surveillance as a sign of victory. Cleopatra tried to commit suicide several times because Octavian sent them to Rome to raise her sister, Octavia, so Cleopatra felt her fatal defeat and wanted to die. Until 9 days after the death of Mark Antony, they came to Cleopatra's room and found him dead on an elegant sofa. The Egyptian leader was dressed in a beautiful dress with various ornaments of gold rings, which seemed to be prepared for his death. It is said that her death was caused by the bite of a poisonous snake, while others claim that it was caused by Cleopatra taking deadly poison and committing suicide. The truth is that Cleopatra's death was very painful for all of Egypt and many of her loyalists. Allies because she proved to be a great woman and a great ruler. The funeral rites dedicated to the great ruler of Egypt were elegant and fulfilled the queen's wishes, as she wished to be buried next to her beloved Mark Antony when she died. Cleopatra's strategic and efficient skills stood out among female rulers, and her monarchy was impressive.